Hey guys, so back again with another video. No, just kidding. Okay, so hopefully this one goes a little bit more smoothly than the last one. Still adjusting to this new system. So we are jumping away from the history a little bit, and we're gonna get to some cool and some fun things. This is the beginning of what's really gonna be cool about this entire year. So let's start talking about observation. So today the goal is you are going to get notes over observations. You picked those up already. We are going to talk about a project that I am giving you now, but you don't turn in until almost the end of October. And excuse me, I'm so sorry. And then we will discuss a quiz over the history stuff that you guys took notes over last time. And then I'll walk you through how to do the activity that I left for you today. Our focus. So we have some things that it's a little harder to take notes on these because it's more things I need you to think about and to kind of self-evaluate and self-reflect on, do you do this, don't you do this type of deal. So we're going to discuss and define what observations are. We're going to describe the things that affect our ability to be good observers, how our brain, for the most part, deals with information. We're going to describe the factors that can influence an eyewitness and talk about why sometimes eyewitness accounts are not the most credible and they're not the main reason that someone should go to jail. Um, you will practice your observational skills. Some of this is encompassed in the notes as well. And then on your blue carbuncle activity, which is a group activity, my goal for you is to communicate politely and effectively with your group so that you get the assignment done properly and well. Okay, so that's that. Let's jump to the next thing. Okay, so while you're waiting for me, pull out your notes. Now this one's going to jump around. I didn't put all of the slides on here for you. You should only have a few of these slides that we're going to work through. Some of them I'm saving for when I come back. We're going to be on the observation, topic for a couple of days at least. Okay, observation skills. Ready, set, go. Let's do it. Okay, so again, these are the things I'd like for you to be able to do. You're not going to be able to do everything that's listed here because we're not talking about the entire PowerPoint today. All right. So, a forensic examiner or a forensic scientist, anyone in this field worth their salt, must be able to do three things. Thing number one is you have to know what your evidence is. So you got to be able to find the evidence. So like we've talked about before, it's not like the evidence wears little evidence stickers or they have little tags that say, hey, I'm evidence, come over here, you should get me. It's really going to be about you becoming a good observer and making decisions on what you think you're going to need access to later on in this case. So once you find your evidence, you must be able to document or record that evidence. How you document and how you record has everything to do with what type of evidence you're working with. We don't use the same process for all forms of evidence. Then once we have the evidence recorded, it'll then be sent to the proper scientist, the proper channels, and we're then going to accurately figure out, is this evidence significant? Is it giving me any information that's going to be useful in solving this crime? All right, so those are our three things. Find the evidence, document the evidence, and interpret the evidence. So let's jump ship just a little bit. And let's kind of think about what an observation actually is. So I'm not going to do a whole lot of talking here. I want you to spend some time looking at this image and just noticing some details. You can write some stuff down on your slide. You can talk to the person next to you, but just spend a little bit of time looking at this slide. Okay, so anything on the slide is fair game. It could be stuff in the background. It could be the people in the foreground. So let's just talk about some stuff that we are noticing. So your brain tends to hone in on things that you are comfortable with first, or things that are familiar to you first. So many of you might have noticed that everyone at the front of this picture are girls. At least it looks like they're girls. It might be kind of hard to tell based on where you are in the room. So, whoops, all girls. Okay. We might know, whoops, sorry. Ugh. We might notice that they're all wearing either tall socks or boots. We might notice that it seems like all of them have some kind of head covering or something on their heads. Okay. At first glance, it might appear that they're all wearing a white shirt. Oops. Oh my goodness. Then you might notice that there are cars in the background. If you're really perceptive, you might notice that one of those cars is parked, like it backed into that spot, if you will. So if you look closely, you should be able to see like the lights or the front end of most of the cars, but one of them is turned around. You might notice that it seems like they're on a gravel road. The road's not paved. Okay. Maybe some of you are thinking to yourself, this looks like it's out in the country, somewhere where there's a lot of open space. Okay. You might notice that there are houses in the background. Somebody else might have noticed this big rock right here, or that there is a lawn or grass behind them. So notice the things that I pointed out are the bigger images in the picture, the things that you easily see. But when we start looking at specifics like their clothing, at first glance, it might seem that everyone's wearing the same color pants or even the same types of socks. But when you look a little bit closer, you realize that they're not. At first glance, it might look like, hey, everyone has on a tie. But then when you look a little bit closer, you realize that actually only these two have on ties. This girl has a whole completely different situation going on, and there is no tie here and no tie there. So why is it that some things pull our attention more than others? Well, it's all about how your brain reacts to situations, and it's all about how stressed or how oblivious or how much our attention is being pulled in some other direction that determines what we actually remember. Okay, so hopefully you were kind of scribbling some of these things down next to your slides as we were going. Let's move on to the next one. Okay. So, what is an observation? I need you to know that an observation is how our brain reacts to something that we are aware of. So, it's never going to be something that we didn't see or didn't hear or didn't know. For it to be an observation, we have to be aware, we have to be present, we have to know that we are seeing or experiencing or feeling something. But our brains are tricky. They have the tendency to fill in things we don't actually remember. You may not know for a fact that she was wearing shoes, but you feel like she should be wearing shoes, so your brain remembers her wearing shoes. Okay? Our brain doesn't like to have gaps or places where we don't know what's going on. So sometimes it'll just spontaneously fill in some information for you. And sometimes it does it so well, you really think that that's what happened. That's what you remember, but in truth and in fact, you weren't even there or didn't even experience it. So, in order to make sense of, and the reason your brain is doing this is because your brain likes things to make sense. Everything should be logical, everything should tie in together. So, when your brain stumbles upon information that doesn't make sense, it enriches the details, it fills in some extras so that it does make sense later on. Think back to when you were a kid. Think of a favorite memory of when you were a kid. And normally, our happy memories, or sometimes our very, very sad memories, are so intense and so powerful that when we think about them, it feels like we're living them all over again. Okay. So that's the enriching or the detail that our brain is giving to that memory. Sometimes we can see things, feel things, smell things, hear things. Like for me, I always think of going to my grandparents' house when I was a kid, and in my mind's eye, I can tell you exactly where my grandmother would have been sitting. I can tell you what she would have been wearing, what her perfume smells like, what even the house smells like, because it always smelled like whatever she had cooked that day. um, I can tell you like what I would hear if I were outside, if it were like our puppy barking or if it was just kind of like the sound of the ocean. But I've lived that experience and I've lived that memory so many times that I'll probably never forget it. And everyone has multiple memories that we feel that strongly about. But even though you don't experience them every single day, it might have been years since you've last seen or heard or done these things. You still know exactly what it feels like to be in that moment. And that's because of all of the detail enriching that your brain does. Okay. So that's why sometimes you remember things in detail to the point where you believe that that's what you saw or experienced, even though the actual truth is completely different. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. Let's do another little observation type activity. I want you to look at this picture. Hopefully, it's big enough. And I want you next to your slide to just write down some things that this makes you think of. So it could be where this is, what time of year, anything that comes to mind. I'm going to give you a minute or two to do that. Okay, so when I look at this image, I think that this could be fall. Whoops. Oh, you know why I keep messing this up. And I think it's fall because I'm looking at the leaves on the ground. I'm looking at the colors of the leaves. So even though I'm not actually there, all of these things are reading fall to me because somewhere in my experience, this is what fall looked like at that point. I would love to write for you, but for some reason, it doesn't like me right now. Okay, well, I tried. But yeah, fall. Let's just try the laser pointer. At least I can point some stuff out. Then the other thing that comes to mind is time of day. To me, it looks like it could be kind of mid morning, or maybe early afternoon because there's so much sunlight coming through. Like there's still some shade right here, which makes me think that it's kind of later in the afternoon, but there's still sunlight coming through. This looks like either a trail or a path somewhere in the country or maybe somewhere just kind of nature-ish. Definitely not city. I'm not getting city vibes from this. It looks like it's kind of a nice crisp fall day where the temperature isn't freezing, but it's not warm. It's not like tank top and shorts season. It's more like comfy sweater and cute boots season. Or maybe that's just a Grenadian Texas girl hoping for it to not be as hot. I really think that it's that last thing more so. Okay, so all of this just from what I can see in this image, and I don't know if you had the same thoughts, maybe you thought something different, but again, it's just based on using my senses. This is what I notice, and this is what it makes me feel. That's what an observation is. Now, why went with fall and sunlight and early afternoon is all because of this statement right here where it says, our brains apply previous knowledge to new situations. I have not been here. I don't know where this picture was taken, but because of something I've already experienced that looks similar to this, it makes me feel like this situation could be the same thing. We do that all the time just in everyday regular life, and eyewitnesses do it as well. Okay, so what are observations affected by, especially when it comes to an eyewitness? So these are, I need you to know all of these things. Everything that's in red is important. So it's affected by their emotional state. If they are upset or afraid or angry, they might remember more or less than if they were just calm and at ease. If they were alone or part of a group, or they could have been alone, but just lots of people are around, all of those things will affect what they see and how much they remember and how much they hear. If they're surrounded by people, there's a good chance that they're not focused on what's happening at that point in time. They're focused on their friends, so they may not have made very good observations to begin with. But if they're by themselves, then they might be paying more attention to their surroundings and thus will notice more details. Then what type of and how much activity was going on around them at the time, that's going to be a major influence, because if there's a carnival coming down the street and someone's being mugged one street over, you're probably not paying attention to the poor person being mugged one street over. You are looking at the carnival. You're going to look at wherever your attention is drawn the most. But if it's just you, or it's an empty street, or it's a more quiet day, then you might be more prone to notice things that aren't as obvious. Okay, eyewitness accounts. I need you to know that eyewitness reports will vary. They'll vary from person to person. You and I could have seen the exact same crime and give two completely different explanations for what has happened, or can give two completely different sets of details for what has happened. And not only can they vary person to person, sometimes they vary time frame to time frame. Like if I saw something happen, but it's been 2 weeks since the incident and the police are only now coming to talk to me, I may not remember in as good detail as I would have an hour later or 30 minutes after the event took place. Observations are going to depend on a lot of things. How interested you are in what's going on. Like if you care more, you tend to pay more attention. Like we've mentioned before, are you stressed? If you're stressed or concentrating on something else, your focus is on what you're thinking about. It's not necessarily on what's in front of you. Okay, and then of course the amount and kind of distractions present. The more loud and boisterous and detail oriented things that are happening around you, the more likely you are to pay attention to those things than to some of the more quiet or not as obvious activities happening around you. Then we also have to tie in, and no one really likes talking about this, but we also have to tie in things like prejudices and personal beliefs and motives. And like I've kind of mentioned a little bit, if any time has passed between the event happening and when this person's being interviewed. If you generally dislike someone, you may not care a whole lot about what's happening to them. So if you notice them walking down the street because you don't like that person, you may completely ignore the fact that they are walking down the street and thus miss details as a result. Okay, next slide. Okay, the Innocence Project. So the Innocence Project was started in 1992, and it used DNA evidence to examine post-conviction cases. So conviction cases, or cases, sorry, that had already had a conviction. We'd already given somebody a punishment. These people went back and looked at DNA evidence to see, hey, does the DNA also support the verdict that we came to? So the project has found up to 87% of wrongful convictions are due to faulty eyewitness identifications. Someone says that they saw you stealing so and so's cow. They stake their lives on it. And that's why you went to jail. Okay, so the Innocence Project is all about using more modern forms, especially DNA, but sometimes other things, more modern forms of evidence to go back and look at cases that we already made decisions about, just to ensure that innocent people aren't paying for crimes that they didn't commit. Okay, let's step through how to be a good observer. I know that sounds weird. Like there's a way, there's a class. Not really, but there's some things you can do that over time make you better. You know those bell ringers I keep giving you that some of you love and some of you hate and some of you are just like, yeah, whatever. One of the reasons we keep doing that is because the more you do it, the better an observer you will become. So, observe systematically is the first step. You don't want to just walk in and start looking at everything. You want to start on one part of your crime scene and slowly make your way from that area all the way through the room. So if you came into my classroom, for example, you might start at the back right corner of the room. And then you'd slowly make your way from the right to the left all the way across until you've looked at the entire room. But if you walk in and you just start looking everywhere, you're just going to confuse yourself. And then you're not going to remember, hey, did I already count this? Did I already see this? Is this another one? Like you're just going to be very, very confused by everything. Okay, don't assume, and some of you are guilty of this, don't assume that you are going to be able to remember stuff. You are human. Your brain makes mistakes. We've already talked about that part. So go ahead and record things just in case you forget. Like you kind of do that with tests and homework and assignments and like school stuff. You know, your teachers tell you, hey, you're going to have this coming up. And you're like, yeah. I'm not going to write that down. I'm not going to put it in my phone because I'm going to remember. And then you come to class the next day and say, I didn't know we had a test, even though we told you 3 times that you're going to have a test. So same situation here. Okay, turn off filters. This one might be hard for you. So really what that means is don't make decisions before you get in there about what's going to be important. Don't pay attention to what you think is important only. Pay attention to everything and then decide what's important and what's not. On a crime scene, you're not going to know, hey, that one leaf in the back corner, that was important. You're not going to know that until you actually need it. So sometimes it's better to collect several things on the off chance that you need it and have it when you do, as opposed to not having it at all. Oh, I am. Hold on.
Oh, that's what you're making?
Yep.
How much more you have to go?
A bit.
Yeah, a little bit?
Ah.
Oh, I had enough now. I had to go, after I had to work on something for mommy. And laptop
one second.
with the stuff. So she called me.
Oh boy.
I had to not answer. That we don't know what kind of. See, what's in this spoon?
All right. So sorry about that because, you heard that whole conversation. Again, still getting used to this new system. Like I don't even know how to turn it off apparently. Fun times. Anyway, sorry y'all. Where was I? So I believe we were talking about turning off filters. And we've already talked about don't pay attention to what you think is important, kind of decide that everything's important until you don't need it. Excuse me. So this third bullet point where it says make a conscious effort to pay attention to all the details in your surroundings, that is always going to be hard. But when you process these scenes, especially in class, you're going to do it as part of a team. So it's not so much that I, the individual, is responsible for everything in the room. It's this entire team of 5. We are all responsible for the stuff in the room. So splitting things up and having people working in just small sections will help with that a whole lot. Okay, leave the final interpretation of data until later. As you're picking things up, don't start thinking, oh, this connects this person or this is for this. Don't do that, okay? You are supposed to be finding evidence. You're supposed to be looking for patterns and, yes, making connections, but the actual interpretation should happen later, okay? Remember, the more information you gather from the scene, the better your interpretations are going to be because you have a lot of information to build them on. Remember that your eyewitness accounts and even you yourself might be prejudiced. So make sure that you get some evidence that doesn't point to, that isn't subjective. Evidence isn't subjective. Evidence is stone cold facts. So you might feel however you feel, but if you gather enough evidence, it'll still allow you to be objective at your job. Okay, documentation. Like I said before, write it down. Okay, take a picture. Get as much details in a form where you're not going to forget it as you possibly can. Remember that your memory isn't going to be perfect. You are human. You will forget things, and that's okay. Also, remember that your brain does not like to be confused. It doesn't like gaps. So if you give it gaps, it is going to fill those gaps in with things that to it makes sense. And you can't have that for a forensic case. You have to have truthful, factual information. Okay, study situations, read people's body language, look at the way they hold themselves or their positions, find clues in ordinary details. Okay, work backwards. So reverse engineer, if you will, from this is the piece of evidence. Now, how does that lead up to the crime? Be patient. It's going to take practice, and we will practice. Okay, so at this point, this is where we're going to call it good as far as notes go. So remember, the big takeaway is there are a lot of things that are going to affect your ability to be a good observer. Remember that because of all of these things, eyewitness reports can't always be trusted 100%. It is a good idea to build and gain in your observation skills if possible. And as a forensic scientist, your main 3 things are to find evidence, document the evidence, and accurately interpret the evidence. Okay, so at this point, we're done with notes. Let's talk about what you're doing for the rest of class. So if you will, please pull out the Graveyard of Unsolved Cases sheet of paper that you picked up. Okay, this is what it looks like. Now I need to make a quick adjustment. When I printed this, for some reason, I didn't check dates. So the dates you have on your piece of paper is wrong. So if you will please scratch out October 26th and replace it with October 25th, and then go ahead and replace 27 with 26. And of course, it's not due in 2017, it's due in 2018. Okay, so this is your 6 weeks project. It's called the Graveyard of Unsolved Cases, and it's a tombstone project. Note that it's worth 100 points. You don't have to turn it in until almost the end of October. That gives you a lot of time, but some of you will still work on it the night before. Yes, I know who you are. It's okay. It shouldn't be like that, but it is what it is. So what are you doing? You are going to choose an urban legend, a myth, a fairy tale story, something from your culture, like an old wives' tale, an internet hoax, whatever. It can even be like an actual person, if you will. And you are going to lay this unsolved case to rest. It needs to be an unsolved case. So I want you to, excuse me, create a tombstone for the case of your choice. And if you don't remember what tombstones look like, just feel free to Google it. Okay. It doesn't have to be very big. I would like it to be some kind of 3D interactive object. Okay. So I've included all of the details here. I taught, like, if you turn it in on time and complete, you get 10 points. If it's the right size, it can be a little bit bigger than this, but I don't want it to be ginormous. Another 10 points. It can be a tombstone. You can make a coffin. You can make a graveyard. This part's open to interpretation. Okay, so you can make it as big as you want. Um, I want it to have an epitaph, and I've given you a definition for what that is on the front. And then you need to have a typed report, either pinned to the back, or if yours is hollow, then put it on the inside of the project. It needs to be interactive or dimensional. So either it's 3D, it sticks out, it lights up. Maybe you've made little like sections that we can open up and read information. I don't want to just stare at it. I don't just want to look at it and see the writing on it. I want to move parts and pieces around. So here I give you some information about the write-up. Again, it has to be an unsolved case, or at least forensic science related. It needs to be between half to one double-spaced page in length, and I need at least 2 references properly documented. It could be internet, book, whatever. The more effort you put in terms of how creative and how neat you are, the better your points are going to be in this section. And most times I have you present really briefly, like 1 to 2 minutes to the class. We'll talk about if this is going to make it to the final project. I will have multiple due dates for this. So when I come back, I'll give you a sheet with a list of due dates. By such and such date, you must have done this, this, and this. And then we'll have check-ins, and that's how you're going to get some of the grades for this. It's not just one solid grade. Like we talked about before, if I make you do a lot of things, I try to give you grades that reflect that. Okay, so that's our tombstone project. You'll get a rubric as well when I come back. Okay, the other thing that we need to talk about is the history of forensics test. So it's only going to be the people. It's not going to be the crime labs or the equipment or anything like that. I need you to know who they are. I need you to know what they've done. And then extra details like where they're from or even the years that they did their famous contribution could help you to do better on this quiz. This one's going to be matching, and it will be on October 1st and 2nd. So again, history of forensics quiz based off of the notes, just the people. It'll be on October 1st and 2nd, just depending on which day I have you. Okay, so the only thing left is the blue carbuncle activity. So there is a class set. You should have already grabbed this, but there is a class set of stories, and I've written class set on it. And the name of the story is The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle. Sorry about that. And it's written by author Conan Doyle. Okay, so what you're seeing on the screen is kind of what your story looks like, if it'll populate. Okay, and this is just the book. It's literally a story. So I want you to take the story and I want you to read it. And then once you've read it, I want you to do or fill out this form. So you're going to work with 4 people to a group. You can have 3, but I'd like you to have 4 if possible. You're going to read the story. Everyone reads the entire story. And you're going to look for signs of faulty reasoning. So faulty reasoning means things that aren't logical, okay? Kind of like the inductive, deductive reasoning stuff that we've done before. So for example, you have a big head, so you are smart because your big head is for your big brain. That would be faulty reasoning. So you're going to read that story and note every time the author talks about the man making a faulty claim or a faulty reasoning. And then between the 4 of you, you guys are going to compile a list of things that he did incorrectly. Okay, so write down as many of them as you can fit into the space. Then each of you in your group, you're going to choose just one thing from that list that all 4 of you worked on together. And you are going to write a short paragraph about that one error. So you're going to explain why it's incorrect and you're going to tell me how evidence could have been explained differently, okay, based on the story. And here's where you're going to write that little paragraph. Okay, so read the story, come up with a list. Each of you choose something different off of that list, and then write a little explanation as to why the thing you chose was incorrect and how the evidence could have been used differently. Okay, all right, and then that should take you to time. You will put the stories back in the appropriate basket, and everything else gets turned into the lockbox. So, have a great day. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you guys real soon. Take care. Bye bye.